there's a particular piece by Borodin, the composer Borodin, and I can't bring the name of the piece to mind, but it's a very danceable piece of music, very dramatic. So I used to do all that, but and I guess the big sort of change, I have two older sisters, so I was the baby of the family, and really a major kind of event for me was in 1963 being exposed to the Beatles. You know, my sister, I had one sister who was into the Rolling Stones, and my other sister, Leslie, who was into the Beatles. And the Beatles had a profound, massive impact on my life. And, you know, so I guess it all stems from there in terms of finding music to be incredibly important. As you get older, you know, your interests change and shift. And I didn't really ever lose the interest in music. I wasn't ever interested in sport. It wasn't something that ever interested me, and it still doesn't, to be honest. But music, yeah, music was the thing. When I was quite a bit older, my sister, who was 7 years older than me, she was heavily into blues and rock. So this is like late 60s, very, very early 70s. So 69, 1970, I'm talking about. She had, you know, a brilliant record collection. And when she used to go hitchhiking around Europe, because what my sister used to do was get a job short term, earn some money, and then use that money to go hitchhiking around Germany, all around Europe. She, a bit later in the 70s, she worked for several years in Heidelberg. And that was really good for me because it meant I could pretend that her record collection was my record collection. And so I used to carry the albums under my arm into school, and you know, kind of like you know, it helped you be one of the hippest kids in the class, you know, because you had the second Led Zeppelin album. It's just come out. I love it. Yes, but of course it was my sister's copy, not mine. So anyway, that's just by way of illustration that music was, you know, terribly important, and part of that comes from me parents, as I say, and a massive portion of that comes from my sister. Her record collection was absolutely formative for me.
Okay, so yeah, let me ask a question that seems interesting to me, at least. So if there's any way that you can kind of think back on how listening to music actually was for you back then compared to now, like you being, I say, like just an expert listener, but also a professional listener nowadays, right? And
Yeah, sure.
like, so the parameters have changed considerably. But what about, like, what I'm interested in is, do you think that you had a talent for music? Was there anything, and I don't mean you know, like making music. I mean about like picking up on what's going on in the music, and that could be emotionally or that could be technically, but probably both.
I think one of the earliest recollections I had about music, about listening to music, was the effect it had on me. So not every piece of music had an effect. Some music, you know, just floats past you, but some I can remember, you know, getting shivers and kind of, you know, I had hair then, and all the hair standing up on the back of my head. And that could be, I could get that from, you know, I don't know, a Beatles LP or you know, whatever it happened to be. And I think the other thing I remember that impact, and wondering why, and it feeling quite odd, and also realizing that not everybody in my small social circle actually had that quality. the other thing as well, I'm kind of interpreting after the event, of course. None of this was ever conscious. But I do remember listening to music, and it made me, and hearing narratives within the music, like almost like a story. So it's not like following the lyrics. It's something else underneath the lyrics, or like expressed and not overtly expressed by the instruments, i.e., you know, it's not the guitar solo that you're going, wow, that's an amazing guitar solo. The narrative here is so heroic. You know, it's not that. It's something. It's like a smell of something that you can't put a name to. It's just there. And sometimes encountering that and not being able to articulate it, but recognizing it was there, and then it was gone. You know, but it did come, and for a brief moment or two, you kind of recognized something. Now, I never would have expressed it in that way at the time. This is me after the fact, rationalizing it as you do. But for me, to answer your original question, I think listening to music was, it was a bit of a chase, you know, it was a bit of a chase. And by that I mean, you know, you put the music on and you would go somewhere. The music would lift up and go somewhere, and you just thought, I've got to follow that. I've got to go where that's going, or at least try to go where that's going, without ever thinking that, without ever saying, oh, the music is going. What is this psychological process that I'm undergoing? The danger sometimes is you talk about these things and it sounds a bit mystical. And it's not. It's entirely, you know, it's all down to brain. It's all, you know, it's all kind of verifiable stuff, I guess, from that point of view. But the effect was remarkable, and still is. So when I was a kid, I didn't have any language for it. I wouldn't have been able to describe it properly, if at all. But it was something I recognized. As I've got older, and of course, you know, doing what I do for a living, you know, I'm better at describing it now, or at least recognizing it. And I think it's exciting. I still find listening to music exciting. Sometimes it, you know, like it just grabs you. And that feeling is just remarkable. It happens when you're a teenager and you're about 14, 15. So I'm talking about, like, I don't know, 1972. I would be 14 or something. And of course, you know, you've got hormones, you've got all sorts of things going on, and music was just the most amazing thing. And I remember going to a concert, and often you'd go to concerts. So we're talking about live music now, you know, and of course that was a totally different ball game. It wasn't just listening. That music had a physical quality to it, i.e., it hit you in the chest because it was so loud, or it hit you in the stomach. And of course, all the hairs stand up, and I had a lot of hair back then. And so that impact, and often you'd go and see bands and you didn't know the music. Like, you know, you knew the band had a name. And you weren't there because you were a fan, but it was just because you were there to kind of commune with something. And it didn't matter that I didn't know the music. It was just so exciting to be there and to follow things. And of course, afterwards, you then assimilate the music and you kind of start picking it out and figuring it out and so on. And it was important to have a couple of friends who shared that kind of passion. So, and not everybody did, you know, I mean, I think there was one guy at school who's sadly no longer with us. He was a massive Zappa fan. And you know, it's horrible music, but he kind of was sort of pointing in that way. He was also into bands like Cream, so slightly more conventional. And my sister was into Cream, so that was a kind of a more conventional experience. But you would have one or two friends who would have this passion and this facility, if you like, to sort of. But you would also have lots of other friends who maybe had the album, but you could see it wasn't having any effect on them, or at least not the same way. They'd say, "Oh yeah, it's great. I like it, yeah," and there was nothing else behind it.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I used the word talent. Like I just didn't have anything better to say. Maybe you have a better word, but there was something that resonated with you, and it was the music, or it was the storytelling aspect of the music, maybe, or the storytelling that happened within you as you were listening to the music.
Yeah, I think a bit of both, and I think you can't underestimate orchestral music. When the important thing is that you experienced all kinds of music as a child. But I think when I first really started to kind of become aware of structure and form, was through my parents' classical music collection, and hearing like a piece like Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Not particularly one of my favorites at all, but I can remember realizing that there was several things going on at once.
Yes.
It wasn't just the tune. It's a pretty little tune, but there's other things happening, and these other things happening have a relationship, and becoming aware of that relationship.
There you go.
And again, not in a conscious way, not saying, oh, there is a relationship between the bassoon and the cor anglais, It wasn't like that. But actually it was, you did start to notice things. Another big piece for me was as a younger child, Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral. That was epic. It seemed to me like there was a whole world in there. So, and sometimes when you listen to rock music, as I began to when I got older, although it was fundamentally very different, actually there was all these different relationships going on, and so picking up on what the bass player's doing, and realizing what the drummer's doing, and it wasn't just. There is a period of when you're a kid and you're listening to music, it's all about finding heroes, so it's the heroic guitar solo usually, but it is also when you get nerdy about it, it's the heroic drummer. When I was a young teenager going to concerts, there was nothing I liked better than the drum solo. And the longer the drum solo, the better, because it was like it was a rite of passage, to kind of, first of all, the drum solo would come, and I mean these days, of course, if there's a drum solo, everybody leaves to go to the toilet, or used to when venues were open. But back then, it was like, fuck yeah, Ian Pace is going to do the drum solo now, and it was you kind of like freaked out while Ian Pace was for 20 minutes thundering around the kit. I think I remember once dancing, like idiot dancing, like freaking out, as we used to call it. I think who was the drummer in Jethro Tull? I think it was Barrymore Barlow was doing a drum solo in Jethro Tull. And it went on and on and on. And at one point I was thinking, I was bravely freaking out. And you got to remember, this is a seated venue, and there's only half a dozen people in the entire venue doing this, standing up and waving their arms and shaking their head. And I was one of them. And of course, desperate for him to kind of finish his drum solo so I could sit back down, because I felt dead embarrassed, But joking aside, so you developed a kind of an instinct for these relationships, and within those relationships, the fact that there could be some kind of narrative that could be teased out or discerned in some way. And some of that would just be projecting, but some of it,
Yeah.
it seemed like there was something else in the music.
Yes. Yeah, you know, Sid, I mean, you're not that much older than me, but still, I think I think it's really you were fortunate to be around for, you know, this really unique part in musical history. You know, like I don't even know when they started recording properly, you know, like in the early 50s it was still probably just one microphone, and then so really the Beatles albums, you know, you can see the development going from like, you know, 2-track to whatever, 16 or 24 track even. I don't know exactly, but you know what I mean. So, and all that in your in the time that you were brought up, and I think just this opportunity to really become familiar with music while music or rock music, popular music was actually developing into what it then was in the 70s, 80s, and, you know, probably also nowadays. But anyway, there's I think it's fantastic to see how you picked up on the, you said, like, on the, first of all, it was the whole the emotional response to the music. Then you started picking out the elements that you were hearing. Then you saw the bands play, and then you were able to kind of like, okay, that's the drummer, that's the bass player, etc. And everything kind of started like becoming more detailed, let's say. And nowadays, like when I read your reviews, I can see that you're kind of like always kind of like taking all these different perspectives and turn those into words. And you said that back then, obviously, you didn't have words for these things. So how did this happen to you, that you became a writer and a wordsmith? Has the music and the art of writing always been did that always go hand in hand for you?
I think I wanted to write. I mean, I think I used to write from a very early age, you know, and definitely when I was a teenager, I used to write. And it would be poetry. You know, I used to write poetry and short stories and things. Also, you know, in the very early 70s, you know, writing lyrics for songs, because I was in a couple of bands. So that would be the writing aspect of it. But and there was a bit later in the I think it was the 80s, or maybe it was the late 70s, early 80s. I'm not sure which. You know, there were local publications and things, and I used to write the occasional thing for those things. But I guess it wouldn't be. I didn't really do anything about it, and I certainly didn't do it with any great regularity. I always used to write, and I used to write, as I say, poetry and personal writing, and keeping a diary and a journal, none of which I've got anymore, which is probably a good thing. But it wasn't until, I guess, in the late 90s that I thought that I started thinking about writing, not as a job, but something that I definitely wanted to do. And it was also, I think it's worth saying, in the 70s, reading people like Richard Williams in the Melody Maker, and other writers like that, they were incredibly formative. And I think sometimes you would read an article by a rock critic, and it would really help unlock the music. And I never made the connection. Like, I didn't think, oh, I'd like to do that for a living. But it was something, writing about music. Once I actually started writing about music, I thought, oh gosh, this is a good idea. Why haven't I done this like all my life, you know? But I started work on I got some commissions, like paid jobs, just through accidents, really, and thought it might be good to do this for a living. And eventually, through a long story short, I guess I've been doing this professionally now for about 26 years, something like that. And I mean, I never take it for granted, and it continues to surprise me that actually somebody's willing to give me money to write about, I don't know, John Anderson, or whoever it is, or Markus Reuter. You know, I'm always amazed that actually anybody's willing to sort of pay money for that. You know,
I think it's a very rare skill or just it's rare to find good writers that also love music and not just love music, because that's that's belittling what you do. I think, like, you know a lot about music too, right? And I think if like, you have all these things available within one person, so you become a professional. And I think I still remember when you started being a freelancer, when you started being self-employed.
Yeah.
Because I think I first met you in 97 or 98. And
yeah. I was working, I would still be in 98, I would still be working for a local authority. I would have been a local government officer at that point. But because I think I turned pro in 2000, maybe 2001 actually. So it's not that long in terms of being pro. But I think I was pro from 2001. I think I need to check. I think just one quick observation is for me, it's always about, I mean, writing about music is just inherently a stupid thing to do, because the best you can do is, what you're doing is you're chasing the, I think of it this way, it's like chasing the heat trail of a jet. And the quick thing about that is, if you get too close, it'll burn you. And also it accelerates so fast, it's so hard to keep up with it that you can't keep up with it. And all you're left with is the fumes that's left by this amazing thing called music. And so the best I can do is to describe the moment as best I can. And that's very often what I'm doing. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you get a piece and you think that's quite good. And the other thing I would say about it is, like, for example, this week all I've been doing is writing reviews for Prog magazine. And it's like every single review is different, and you would think, having written 5 on the trot, it would just be like a conveyor belt, but it's not. I seemingly lose the ability to write as the minute piece number 3 is submitted and gone, and then I turn to piece number 4, and it seems I can't write anymore and have to learn how to write again from scratch, and I guess that's because the music, you're responding to the music.
I guess that's true, but I would also say that in a way, you're an artist as a writer, and you're not the kind of person who would just want to write the same thing over and over, just like I don't want to compose the same piece over and over, so I understand that's that's what happens. So I have 2 thoughts here. So first of all, kind of like, are you aware, or let's just start in this other direction. So I guess that if you say, like, writing about music is inherently stupid, or whatever you said, I would say, like, since you discovered your love for music just by listening to the music, so by being affected by the music directly, and now that there are magazines, and there were magazines back then too, but and you're writing for a magazine for people who want to probably discover something new. So really what you're doing is you're kind of like acting as a medium in a way for them to discover new music. So
I think that what I'd say about that is, in this day and age now, I think back in the day when I was reading music papers, there was no means of discovering this music.
Mhm.
other than, you know, Writer X or Richard Williams or whoever it was,
Mhm.
reviews an album, and you read the review and you think, wow, that I must get that, or I
Mhm.
must listen to that. And of course, the only way you could listen to it would be if by chance it came on the radio,
Mhm.
or you went into a record shop and could afford to buy it, and I generally couldn't afford to buy the LPs at the time. And the other way you do it was you'd ask the person in the shop if they would play the LP over the speakers, you know, or
Mhm.
in a booth or whatever. So
Mhm.
they were the only ways of really investigating the
Mhm.
music. Of course, today it's completely different, and everybody's got access to everything in
Mhm.
one fell swoop.
Mhm.
So in that sense, people who write about music are often really, in a sense, surplus to requirements. Uh, People can discover things. They don't need a gatekeeper. They can discover things themselves, etc., etc. However, when there's millions and millions and millions of things available out there, sometimes I think it's useful. I know I've benefited from it. Somebody like Steve Smith, who used to write for the New York Time Out, um, you know, you'd read what he was listening to, and it would be, oh, right, okay, because he
Mhm.
was somebody whose taste you kind of felt you had some affinity with, and also his writing's really good, so you would follow his suggestions.
Mhm.
So sometimes, although we don't need music critics anymore, because with the internet, everyone's a critic. Everyone can slag an album off, or say, or sometimes, occasionally say, this is a great album. But sometimes you need people who are signposters, perhaps.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't think I know anecdotally that, without sounding, you know, ridiculously egotistical, I know anecdotally, because people tell me this via comments on social media, that they have heard something because I had like raved about it online.
Yes.
And usually raving about it online just involves putting up a picture of the thing and
Mhm.
saying, "Whoa, this is great," and that's about the extent of it. But sometimes that's enough
Mhm.
to point people in a direction. So I think it's finding you. How do you discover new music, given the avalanche of data that arrives on a daily basis? I mean,
E-
I can't keep up with it.
Exactly, and that's why I think that people like you are actually more important than ever. Really, it's
Yeah,
I really mean that. Uh,
yeah. Oh, well, that's
because
very
I remember the times when I was you know, hearing a song on the radio, and I got that particular feeling that I was very interested in finding out what this is, and
yeah.
that just hardly ever happens anymore, because I also believe that psychologically things have changed so much for it, because like I think that we're kind of programmed by evolution
Mm,
to be interested in the things that we discover ourselves,
yeah,
right? So, and just reading, let's say, Sid Smith saying you should check out the band XXXXX, right?
yeah,
That means that you still have sort of, if you then go listen to it, you still have sort of discovered it yourself, because you if you know what I mean. So
yeah, yeah.
it's really kind of like a bridge to something that used to happen back in the day when you went to a disco or in the radio, or you know, you heard something that, yeah.
It's exactly. I mean, going back to, as I say, 1972 or 1971 or anything. How did you ever hear anything? Well, how you heard things were through your sister's collection or your brother's collection. You know, the amount of people I've interviewed, musicians I've interviewed, who tell me that they were influenced by their older brother's music
Hmm.
collection,
Hmm.
or some sibling or other. And of course, the other thing was, you know, going round to people's houses, because everybody had different collections, because nobody could afford to have everything. It's
Hmm.
not like now where you know, you've got everything more or less, you know.
Hmm.
Back then, if you wanted to hear, I don't know, the new Wishbone Ash album, God forbid, there, you know, that a rumor would get out that so-and-so's got the new Wishbone Ash album, right? Let's go to his house, you know. And literally the other sort of side of it, without romanticizing it too much, is it would be an act of communion. It would be, you know, the platter would be taken out of its sleeve and it would be reverentially put on the turntable and you would sit around listening to it. And sometimes you'd talk over it and what have you. But, and you know, most of the time there was no, you know, nobody was smoking dope back then, at least not in my milieu. You know, the best you could expect is so-and-so's mother knocking on the door, bringing in orange juice and biscuits, you know. That was a kind of wild night, you know. But the point of the story is the music was central. And today, in terms of our culture today, for the last God knows how many years, music is an accessory to something else.
But not for everybody. Not for everybody.
No, not for everybody, but I would say for a large portion of people, certainly. You know, I mean, I think it's an age thing. I think, you know, there are young people who are passionate about music. Of course there are. But in broad cultural terms, music is, it's accessorized. It's something else that happens while a game is on or while some other experience is happening. It's not the experience itself. You know, I'm talking in broad terms. There are obviously millions of exceptions to that rule, but that's what it kind of feels like. But back then, how you listened to things was determined by geography, by your social group, and actually, I met a guy. This is a true story. I'm still friends with him to this day. I met a guy at a youth club, and I fancied myself. Largely because I used to read the Melody Maker, I fancied myself as a bit of a jazz fan. You know, I knew nothing about jazz. I mean, nothing. But I think I'd heard. I can't even know. I can't remember what I'd heard. I'd almost certainly heard almost nothing. But it felt kind of cool to say that you like jazz. So I was set up by somebody who wasn't very keen on me to meet this other guy who was a jazz fan, and he was going to knock me flat with his superior knowledge of jazz, you know. And of course, all that happened was that this person who introduced us who brought us together, all that happened was me and this guy who was going to knock me flat with his superior knowledge of jazz, we just became the best of friends. And the other guy who'd introduced us, like, we just said, yeah, see you, mate. And he had an older brother who was into jazz, and so him and I, you know, embarked on a journey of seeking out as much jazz as possible, you know. And he'd seen some jazz, whereas I think at that time I probably hadn't, you know. So you meet people, and they change your life. You don't realize they're changing your life, but they've decisively changed your life, you know. So it's kind of a weird. Back then, it was a sort of a weird, and of course that goes on all the time now. It's not something that only happened. Well, I always say 30 years ago, but it's not. It's 40 years ago. It's nearly 50 years ago, or it is 50 years ago. That happens all the time. It just happens in different ways.
Yeah.
And back then wasn't necessarily a golden period. I think there's, you know, I hear all sorts of music that was recorded in the last few years, which is for me just as exciting as stuff I heard 50 years ago. It's different. There's a fundamentally different thing at play, but yeah, there's so much good music around. You know, some of your stuff, some of the stuff, you know, it's all there if you can find it. And if you've got the time. One of the problems is, how do you find the time to keep up with it all? That is a serious problem for me.
I mean,
And
for me as a professional musician, it's impossible to kind of stay up to date with what's going on musically.
no, and I think as a musician, the other thing is you don't necessarily want to listen too widely because you sometimes things get in your head, and it can affect your inner voice,
Yes.
the inner things that you're hearing, or the inner the kind of the prompts that you're getting. So not everyone listen. So I feel quite relaxed now about not knowing. For example, there's a joke that the editor of Prog magazine and I always trade. You know, when you do those best albums of the year kind of lists, and he sort of said to me this year, he said, "Oh," he says, "you're getting a bit mainstream. I've heard 3 of the albums on your list," kind of thing. and of course, on his list, I've never heard any of them because we listen to different things, you know, and that's fine. You know, you can't listen to everything, including this podcast.
You know, Sid, all of this makes me think of something that was a big part of my life, actually for maybe even almost 15 years. I had a recurring dream. And this recurring dream was browsing in a record store. And I was looking for, just for lack of a better word, for like the Holy Grail for that one album. And that was actually what it felt like being in a record store when I was 8, 10 years old or something, right?
Yeah.
And but that was a recurring dream, and it always, you know, took place in a bigger structure, which was for sort of like a department store or something like that. And I remember there was a swimming pool even, and escalators, and, you know, all these. And then there was that small record store, and I was browsing, and I took the sleeve out, and I looked at the colors, and then I turned the album around, the sleeve around, and I saw like some notes on the back, and then I realized, okay, I have never heard this before, this, you know, and that actually it's true, it was a recurring dream until I started to record my own music. Isn't that amazing? I mean, just looking back gives me goosebumps. It really was true. So I think you know, my dreams wanted to tell me, like, dude, you need to go out and create these things, this holy grail that you want to hear, that you're looking for. And so sorry, I needed to share that, because I think it's, you know, it's very much this, and what you said at the very beginning, that you had this sense of like being able to recognize something or the music that was of particular interest to you. And that I find has really also for me has been like the major driving force in my life, like this. And later on, I had a good sense of what that was that I was looking for. Like as a child, probably as a teenager, I didn't have that knowledge, but nowadays, and so Sid, being a professional, what's that like?
It's about, I have a mixed relationship with it. If I say this stuff out loud, it sounds so self-serving, and it will prompt you to say, "Oh, no, come, you are very good." But my relationship with being like I earn my living. I am the breadwinner in the house. I earn my living solely from writing about music. I don't do anything else. I don't have a paper round. I don't, you know, whatever else. There are no supplements to my income other than what I derive every month from writing about music. But for me, my relationship with it is fraught, because literally everything I do is plagued with doubt. So I spend a lot, like, for example, today, just coincidentally, I'm writing a piece on Syd Barrett from Pink Floyd. fame. And my starting point is I know nothing about this, and I can't possibly have a view, and I cannot express this. And why did I agree to write this piece? And that happens with everything. It doesn't matter how short it is, and it doesn't matter how long it is. So I have part of my process of being a professional is to spend a lot of time telling myself I can't do this. And I've tried changing my work practice. I've tried, because I've been doing it for a long time, and I pretty much generally hit the deadlines that are requested of me. So I'm doing something right, but part of me part of that process is to be lost and utterly plagued by doubt. And I always think Americans have, this is a broad cultural stereotype, I'll give you fair warning, but whenever I talk to any American writers, they're super confident, and they're kind of like, yeah, and I just think, God, I wish I could do that, but I struggle to do it. But I find that somehow I get there and I get over it, and I get the piece done. But it's always the gap between what's in my head, what I think I'm going to write, and the piece that eventually is transferred via my fingers into the keyboard and onto the screen. The gap between those two different worlds is so sometimes immense. And the chasm that yawns between idea and execution. And every time, if Debbie was here, she would tell you that every time I press send, I literally am in the pit of despair because I've sent something that I feel is utter rubbish. And every time I expect to get it sent back to me with notes. And once or twice it's happened, and actually it's really good when that happens, because it kind of makes you lift your game. But mostly it doesn't. Now that either means the people on the receiving end who are paying the money just don't care how bad it is, or maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. My point is, though, none of that matters, and it doesn't matter how many times people say, "Oh, that's a marvelous piece. I loved that piece." It's very nice to get that kind of praise, but I always just can see the gap between the idea and the execution, and it's so poor. It makes me want to die of embarrassment, and I can't ever read it back. I never ever read when the thing appears in print. I can't read it because all I can see is the stuff that I was trying to say but didn't say. And I think actually most artists, I've interviewed lots of people, and when you talk to them, they'll often say, "Oh, I can't listen to my own music," because all they hear is the mistakes or the missed opportunities or the time when the tape didn't work and they had to use a wrong take or something like that. So it must cut across other mediums.
Exactly. And I don't want to take away from what you said, and I'm not going to say you're great. No, but what you describe is what an artist experiences. Sure. And that's what I meant earlier, right? This is kind of like the struggle of an artist. And I have it every single day, single day, and it's, as you say, it never goes away.
And how do you deal with it?
Oh, I get depressed. I kind of start like doubting myself.
Sure.
And I think what I do is also when I listen back to what I played or recorded. I actually had this very thing last night when I sent something to Devin Townsend, which he asked me to play on one of his pieces, and I recorded like some tracks for him, and it felt horrible, really felt horrible, and I couldn't really see even the sense in me being involved, right? Like it goes that far, far. Yeah. And then he writes back to me, says it's great, I can use quite a bit of this, and that's that's really how it goes, and I'm sort of relieved in a way, but also it goes that far that I don't believe the other
No,
side. And
no.
you know exactly what I mean, right?
That's exactly me every time. I got a lovely unsolicited email from somebody yesterday, just sort of saying that they'd appreciated something I'd written. And my immediate instinct is, well, this person obviously can't read.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because if they could read, they would know. but we and it's there's like, do you know if your gig is a good gig or not? You know, like if I don't know, there's a Stickman show or something.
yeah.
Do you have any sense of, wow, we've done a great gig tonight, or is it a mystery to you?
It is a mystery, but what I found, like being on stage, I found that it is absolutely necessary and important to have a sense of accomplishment after a show. I
Yeah.
think I wouldn't be able to do this if, I think in a way it's a little bit, and it's funny because it's only in that situation of being, but the Stickman shows, as an example, are not necessarily creative. Like there may be slots with improvisation, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, you could say, okay, we fucked up that section, or or I didn't play well tonight. Yeah, I can say that. But really it does not mean anything for the audience. Like the audience, there's so much more than that. And like nowadays we have the monitoring with in-ears, so we kind of like hear the same kind of mix every night anyway. And so nowadays what I do is, like, I think I usually have a little bit of a sense how it was. um, but since we go out into the audience after the shows and I get to talk to people, that's when I get some like soothing, from
Yeah.
from the words. And
Yeah.
but yeah, but I know what you mean, and especially when you don't have good monitoring, which people really don't. And it's, in a way, it's a little bit an analogy to you reading what you've written, and basically you have a kind of blind spot for even like reading your own words, but
Yeah.
with the in-ear monitors, it's like you have this feedback, and that's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah.
So nowadays it's much easier for me to be relaxed about shows.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I generally trust the process. I trust that there's a moment where, when I start the process, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then as the deadline looms and gets nearer, I then sort of go for a walk, or I go down and hoover the landing or something, I procrastinate. And then eventually there's a point at which you have to sit down and you have to write the thing.
Mhm.
And and the other thing that happens is, this awful feeling that you've got is going to be over, because by tomorrow, because today is the deadline,
Yeah.
and the piece has to be sent.
Yeah.
And that tomorrow you're going to be all right, so you just can get through it. And of course, most writing is not actually writing. Most writing is thinking.
Yeah.
The writing part of an article is almost the shortest bit. Well, it is the shortest bit, because it may take, I recently wrote a 5,000 word cover feature for Prog magazine, and to write 5,000 words, in a sense, doesn't take very long. What takes the time is the thinking about all, you think about the interview you've done, you listen to the interview you've done, you transcribe it, you think about narratives and the relationships, and kind of one vibe against another, etc., etc. All of that's in the head. The actual writing of it is the last and quickest bit of it.
And again, it's exactly the way that I think a lot of musical artists feel about creating. I mean, I know from myself, for example, the Todmorden 513 piece. I had the idea 10 years before it was written down, and it was there, and it was, and maybe you said you were saying thinking about it, right? maybe I wouldn't even go that far. I would say it's more than that. It's almost like emotionally processing that you've taken on the task or the commitment to do it, really. And it's that processing that then I think creates the emotion or the urgency to write something that has power. I mean, at least for my music, that's true. I think the waiting.
I think sometimes when I'm writing a piece, I know I'm always relaxed. I relax a little bit. I'll listen to a bit of the interview I've done, and I'll think to myself, "Oh, that's how the piece finishes. That quote. That's where the piece is going to finish." I usually get that. So I usually know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
There's a trajectory kind of gets plotted out subconsciously. But sometimes you'll hear somebody say something. And, I interviewed you a few years ago for a piece in Prog magazine. And I knew, I think we were talking, I think it was on Skype. And I think a pipe had burst or something in your house, and your flat or house was flooded or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And we both sort of said, "Oh, living the dream," kind of, and we were laughing about that. But actually, that hashtag that you used in your thing, that became the tag on which I was able to hang the piece.
Yeah, amazing.
And living the dream, and this kind of whole, so you can explore what that means, in all its rich meaning. But often I will know how a piece will finish. All I've then got to worry about is how it starts and what's in the middle.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you know how it starts and you don't know where you're going to go, but you'll get there eventually.
First of all, let me say, I think probably the fact that your process is similar to the one of an artist, or could be similar to that of an artist. Your voice sort of counts.
Right.
I find that may be an explanation why people follow your lead when it comes to recommendations or things that you like.
I think sometimes that's just about it's nothing to do with authority. I think it's, and I know you're not saying it's to do with authority, but I'm just sort of I'm wary about sort of being an influencer, to use the modern parlance. And I don't feel like I am an influencer. I think all I am doing is consistently, and I think consistency is something to do with this. I'm just sharing an enthusiasm, I now I might be wrong about this, and somebody will probably rifle through my social media, but I never put up stuff saying, well, this is a shit album. I mean, sometimes I'll say online I don't like something, but I never. So the only rule I have is I will generally not say anything online that I wouldn't say to a person in real life, So I don't shit post people. And I know you can get a lot of clicks and a lot of hits that way, and by being smart arse and writing snarky comments about such and such an artist. But I try not to do that. So if I'm posting up a picture online and saying, listening to, I don't know, whatever it is, it's generally because I think it's worth listening to. And if other people want to listen to it, great, but it doesn't mean it's better than somebody else or anything like that. It's really just going back to that experience of our social media bubbles now, the worlds that the orbits that we inhabit are much like the orbits that I used to inhabit when I was a kid, going round to mates' houses It's just that the houses are, there's many more of them, and geographically it's around the world instead of around a small tiny town, you know.
Yeah.
But it is trying to just be consistent and being generous, you know. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, although everybody recognizes it. Music is it sounds trite when you say it, but music is the thing that for me makes everything make sense. It makes, in a world that is generally, you know, full of greed, deceit, and shit, music has that transcendent quality to change your life. And you know, sometimes it's just there in the background, and that's fine. It's a bit of wallpaper, and that's fine as well. I listen to music just like everybody listens to music in that way. But really, if you can engage with music, and there's nothing mystical about it, and it's not like Zen or anything like that. It's just about finding the time to sit and listen, actively listen. That experience, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. And that you know, that can be an old album that you've known for 50 years. How many times do you hear people say, I hear fresh things in it every time I listen to it? Well, you know, there's a reason for that. It's because you're engaging with it, you know.
Yes.
And not every piece of music has to do that, but it's great when it can. And there's you know, one of the reasons why, you know, I'll keep buying LPs or CDs by Vaughan Williams. You know, I've got zillions of them, you know, and often, you know, there's duplicates, you know, so it's lots and lots of different performances of the Fifth Symphony, for example, Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony, you know, and everyone's different and the nuances are different and you can enjoy them. I can't remember how many copies of The Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams I've got, but like, you know, reliably every time it makes me cry, you know, but I want to cry in a different way to performance A, B, or C, or D, you know. So, and I think music is so key for me and so important. Life would be so grim without it, and that's why the current situation is so terrible, because, you know, we've got musicians who can't work and can't play live, you know. Don't worry about Napster or streaming, because you'll make all your money playing live. Ho ho. Well, of course, you know, that was never true. But you know, it sounded good at the time if you said it quickly enough. And of course now, you know, now you can't even make a living, you know. Oh, CDs are so expensive. Why are you charging us so much? Well, you know, okay, you know, because we want to make a living, you know. And it's grim stuff at the moment, but somehow music gets us through it. Does it change the world? I don't know, but it changes my world, and I suspect it probably changes your world when it happens.
Do you ever find yourself doing prejudiced listening?
What does that mean?
Do you have like well, then that's probably the answer already. But anyway, do you are you able to always listen without prejudice?
I try to. I think I've got all the prejudices that everybody has. For example, I'm not a great fan of vocal music, you know, like with a lead singer, if it's a rock thing. If it's a singer-songwriter, that's a different kind of vibe. And very often, you know, sometimes, you know, I have to work, you know, because the music sounds great, and then the vocalist comes in and kind of ruins it for me because I don't like their voice or their lyrics or whatever it is, you know, whatever. So I'm just as prejudiced as everybody is, you know. One of the reasons why, I mean, this is probably going to cause death threats, but I don't dislike the band at all, but I just don't get it. And that there's a band, I believe they're called Rush. And they're incredibly popular, and I've tried, you know, and I just don't get it. I can't see what the appeal is. Well, I can see what the appeal is, but it doesn't work for me. And so, you know,
That's a very, very good example, because I agree with you. Like for me, it's also difficult to understand why people like it so much. But knowing and having traveled in North America a lot, I can see that there was like a particular kind of culture around when Rush got introduced into the mainstream, let's say, and
yeah,
they kind of like transcended the underground first, and then they became superstars even with that
yeah,
kind of music. And I can understand that this combination of factors can have quite a draw, and that people kind of like, you know, fall in love because of the whole package, let's say. But when we listen to one of their albums, all that context is not there. And that, I mean, I'm not saying that with the context I would like it, but I'm just saying that
yeah,
that there's so much more than the experience of what has been recorded.
yeah.
Yeah, the context is so important.
I find, I mean, it doesn't mean that I think anybody who likes Rush is somehow deficient in taste or anything like that, because clearly that's not the case.
Yeah.
But some music works on you and some music doesn't. And the important thing is, I think, as you get older, and you've got less time available to you for all sorts of reasons, is to not worry about it and just accept that, you know, King Crimson isn't the band for me, or Rush or Genesis or whoever it is. One of the things that I sometimes often get into trouble with for is, and it's not an unreasonable assumption, of course. People get in touch with me and they want to send me their band's album, and you know, I always say, don't send me the album, send me a link so I can listen to something. Because, you know, sending albums is very expensive and costly, and also there's 99% chance I just can't do anything with it, you know. Like, it's not up to me what appears in the magazine, for example. You know, so and very often what happens is they send me a link or a file or something, and I'll listen to it, and it's just not for me. It's not for me. But they assume, because it's got mellotrons and it's prog rock. But I don't really listen to prog rock, and that's why I'm a bit of a crap writer about prog rock, because I don't listen to prog rock that much. I do. You know, I like Van de Graaff Generator and King Crimson and God knows who else as much as the next fat balding man in his late 50s or early 60s. But that's not where the juice is for me. That's not the music that, you know, and I do struggle with what I would call contemporary prog in that sense, you know, prog with a capital P. Sometimes I hear it really as a musical historical reenactment society, where bands are, you know, kind of restaging battles that were fought many decades ago, but their take on it. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't work too well for me. And
you know,
so that's why I listen to old Miles Davis records most of the time.
You know, like some of the saddest moments on the road for me are people who clearly have a dream, and you know, like, and I think it's like something really extremely lovable that they have a dream to make music, and somebody gives me an album, right? And or even better, I see somebody give an album to Tony Levin, and I know that Tony can't listen to it because he doesn't have the time, and also if he had the time he wouldn't listen to it. And I that's and so my advice, and also to people who may be listening to this, never give anybody your music unless somebody asks. And I say this out of experience, and because even still in around 2000 I made that mistake. Then I very quickly realized, if I want to become friends with Pat Mastelotto, right? I don't want to be giving him my music.
No. No.
And so you become friends first,
Yeah.
and then you can share music. And and I guess like the same, and I don't want to encourage people to become friends with you, okay, but basically that's the way it should go.
I definitely don't want any friends. I've got more than I know what to do with online anyway. And if my wife was here, she'd tell you that I don't have any friends in real life either. I can count on one hand the amount of people I see in real life, you know, not just to do with lockdown. In fact, the COVID lockdown thing hasn't changed my life at all.
Mhm.
It really hasn't. There's no impact on me because I never used to go to the pub. I never used to go out on a wild social swirl because 99% of the time I'm sitting in my room fucking writing.
Mhm.
I just don't get out, you know.
So, but like the general story of musicians this year, like the loss of opportunities to earn a living.
Sure.
Even though I know that it probably hasn't affected you financially, but just the overall vibe of what's going on, and just the sheer amount of music that has been put out this year, that must have, I mean, I'm not saying it has changed your life, but I can even see and feel how it has changed the response of the listeners. Like this Bandcamp Fridays thing. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. Like a lot of people say, oh, it's great, such a great thing, and I agree. Like for those artists who basically maybe don't sell that much in the first place, it's a great thing to see that there's this good company, and it's a good company that gives 100% of the proceeds to the artists, and that's wonderful. But what that does, it concentrates all the efforts to get attention on that one day. And I think it's horrible. It's horrible. Where like on my Bandcamp, like I had like a little income like every day, like, and now it's like, it's like concentrated around that first of the month, and overall it's less. So you see, like, so something has been changed in the system, and I think this Bandcamp is just one example. I think overall the business has been changed from the inside out without us actually knowing yet what that's going to mean.
But I think that reads through to wider society beyond music and musicians and music industry. I think one of the things we can't know yet is the way this whole situation around the world will play out, and the impact of something, nothing like this has ever happened in our lifetime. So it's impossible to know how that's going to shake down at all levels of society, regardless of what your job is, or whether you have a job or not. The impact of the wider world is unknown at the moment. I mean, we deal with the day-to-day consequences, or if you're the British government, you don't deal with the day-to-day consequences. But that's an aside. I think we don't know. I mean, making music has always been a tenuous living, except I say that, except one of the good things about making music a few years ago, for example, is there was an ecosystem which allowed people to make a living. It wasn't about selling LPs as it was then, or CDs as it became. There were live venues. There were, as I say, music was more central to the culture, to the popular culture. But I think a combination of factors has made it less so. And I think the whole COVID thing has marginalized whole tiers of people, including musicians and live venues. And we don't know how that's going to play out. We don't know what the end result is going to be of all this change. Very unsettling, very uncertain.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like it's, I really, for lack of a better description, it's like a major generational change, but it's not just a change, it's a cut. And if I don't want to mention like names here, but like think of like the great musicians who are still alive, who were still touring last year, who may never come back. That's something we really need to say out loud. We can't be dreaming that this will all just go away. And
it would affect me, if one of my favorite bands came back out on tour next year, depending on where we are with this whole infection rate, etc., etc. Speaking as somebody who has a wife who is in the vulnerable category, and I'm also of a particular age where I'm in the vulnerable category, I'm probably not going to go and see that band. I'm probably not going to go and see that band, So the last gig I was at was a gig by an absolutely brilliant band. I absolutely loved them. And that was a band called The Utopia Strong. And I was reviewing the gig for the magazine, but I would have been there anyway, because but the point of the story is, it's a small venue. You're absolutely jam-packed together. There's no room to move. And that's what made it a great gig. I mean, and I think I described it in the review. There was a moment where the music, Carvis Tarabi was playing synth and guitar, and Steve Davis was doing something with a synthesizer, etc., etc. And there was this marvelous moment where the entire audience, it felt to me, were part of this one unit that was making something unique happen to that moment. And it was ecstatic. I was high as a kite from it. But I won't be going to see them again in that venue, or probably any other venue, no matter how good that was, because at the moment, being able to breathe and be alive actually is more important.
Yeah. But how sad is that, though?
Yes, it's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy. Yeah.
On that happy note.
On that happy note, we should stop, and we'll talk again in a few months. But
once we know how it plays out.
Yeah.
And I suspect in a few months we probably won't know how it'll play out.
No. It's going to take much longer. I the good thing about myself is that I think I have I'm kind of clever, and the moment we were in Japan, and we were sitting there, and we got the phone call, the tour is canceled. I knew I have to reinvent myself. I knew it, and there was no grief or sadness at that point about what I may have lost. There you go. That's the recording from that one show we did.
Yeah, that's that night, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's the night. And for the sake of the viewer or listener, rather, if this part makes it to the transmission, I'm holding up the latest Stickman album featuring Gary Husband, the brilliant Gary Husband.
Yes, indeed.
But yeah, I mean, it's a historical artifact in lots of different ways. This
exactly.
Yeah,
but anyway, like what I just wanted to say is like I think I'm only just starting to catch up even with the idea that I could be grieving.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So even if we're allowed to tour again, I think the grieving process will only then become really clear and apparent to us, and active grieving will still be going on when we have the new normal.
Yes.
And that's exactly, and that's kind of like what I'm not looking forward to, but in a way I'm looking forward to it. Okay.
Well, you articulate there, I think, what everybody feels. There's a duality going on. One is this is terrible, and I'm looking forward to getting to the end of it, and that's fine, that's understandable. But there's the other part of it, which is I don't know what the end looks like anymore. You know, if your flight gets cancelled, well, you'll just get another flight. You know, if the tour gets cancelled, well, it's a shame, but we'll just do another tour. This is different.
It is different, yes.
Something's been taken away from us that is beyond our control, and it's beyond the control of pretty much everybody. And I think the analogy you use about grieving is pretty close to it. Without going into detail, members of my family, have been affected by this situation in all sorts of different ways. Some of which is, hard to see, because people are struggling with the enormity of what's going on. I mean, and we're very lucky as a family because everybody is still in jobs and, they're able to work from home, etc., etc. So that's all good stuff. But you multiply that across the world, and with all the various experiences, and there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of grieving for sure.
Yeah. Okay, my friend.
Thank
you very much for this conversation, and
thank you. I'm glad we got to it.
Yes. Okay. So no further words. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Take
Bye,
care
my
now.
friends.
Bye.
Bye.